last time you went for a walk? Whether it was to cool down or to head to the grocery store or go to the library. Was it today, this week, a few weeks ago, maybe a month? Now, don't feel bad, okay? But if you said over a week ago, it's probably likely that you live in a suburb in the US or Canada. You may not even consider yourself as somebody who even likes to walk. And again, you shouldn't feel bad about this. You have been put in an environment that really promotes walking at all. You might even try to pick up healthier habits like going to the gym or even going for a run, but these habits just don't stick because they don't fit with your day-to-day lifestyle. But when you go to the mall or on vacation, you easily hit over 20,000 steps a day. Obviously, those activities are fun, but what is it about malls or vacations that make them 4 times easier to walk than usual when compared to walking at home? What can we take from that experience and apply to our cities to make them more enjoyable to walk around? What's happening here? Welcome to the show. This is What Is Happening Here. I'm your host, Tosan, and we talk all about cities and what makes them tick. And today we're talking about what is it about certain places that makes us want to walk there? What specifically is it about that environment that makes walking so easy compared to walking in other places that makes you question your life decisions? You know those walks? There's one beside a 6-lane road with no sidewalk. It makes you feel like you're walking in a 2000s R&B music video, but without the music. If we can understand what separates the underlying principles that make somewhere a good place to walk, we can then use that information to advocate for better pedestrian areas. Because if you really think about it, everyone's a pedestrian. Walkability is the measure of how friendly an area is to walking, considering factors like the availability of sidewalks, safety, accessibility, and the proximity of essential services. It might sound obvious, but what isn't obvious is how the presence or lack of it has such a profound impact on our lives. It matters for our health, happiness, and community. Walkability can be the foundation of overall well-being and a strong community. A walkable community is healthy on average because physical activity is naturally built into everyone's everyday lives. A healthy community will be better equipped to tackle the challenges many are currently facing by promoting physical health, mental health, social connection, environmental sustainability, and economic vitality. When I spoke to Tracy Coots of Ever Actor Schools, she mentioned the benefits that walking has, especially when you compare it to driving.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with moving your body, right? And it's a natural de-stressor. It scales you down. So you're not sitting in a vehicle confined just to your space, music playing, suddenly somebody's in front of you and I also think it's what the expectation is. When you hop in your car, your expectation is, I'm going to get to where I'm going as fast as I possibly can, right? So when somebody gets in your way, you're like, why are you in my way? I'm trying to move as fast as I possibly can.
Walking can become a natural distressor to inoculate us from the stresses of modern day life. I know that walking is good isn't a new revelation. However, more people are starting to question, why is it so hard to walk anywhere? Walkability has migrated from urban planning journals and textbooks to the marketing materials of new developments. Once corporation gets a hold of a word, you know it has reached a different level. I know there has to be a brochure out there of a new development that says, welcome to your wonderful walkable paradise. Meanwhile, the building in question is just a 7-story condo in a parking lot next to a highway and a gravel dog park. But even if walkability is just a buzzword to sell real estate, it shows there is a real demand for more people who realize the way that we built cities in the past does not match their current preferences. According to 2023 Community and Transportation Preferences Survey by the National Association of Realtors, or how Australians might call it, NAR, a significant majority of Americans place high importance on living in walkable areas. The survey found 85% of respondents consider sidewalks and places to walk as very or somewhat important when choosing a place to live. As somebody who moved from the UK, I was flabbergasted to see there were communities without sidewalks, where people lived. Do people not pay taxes out there? I literally thought it was inhumane. Basic human infrastructure was something I kind of took for granted. I didn't know it was even legal to build places without sidewalks. Anyways, additionally, 79% of people reported that being within an easy walk of shops and parks is important, with 78% willing to pay more for homes in walkable neighborhoods. This preference was particularly strong amongst younger generations, with 90% of Gen Z and millennials indicated that they will pay more for a walkable community, and a third stating they will pay significantly more. When was the last time you saw a poll in which over 70% of people agreed with something? There is an overwhelming demand for housing in areas that facilitate walking. People are willing to put the money where their mouth is. Often the most expensive cities in the world are walkable. I would argue many of them are walkable out of necessity because car infrastructure is incredibly expensive. However, many people cite that one of the benefits of living in an expensive city is the convenience of being able to walk around to meet most of your needs, and that is a real tangible benefit. I am sure that the COVID-19 pandemic had an impact on people's desire for walkable neighborhoods. The pandemic brought many challenges, but also helped us realize the importance of walkability in our cities. We were inside, cut off from social contact with anyone outside of our immediate roommates, partners, or family members. Many people were even 100% alone. One of the few places you could go to see anybody was outside on the streets. With reduced traffic for the first time, the noise of cars was absent, and people could turn to outdoors for safe, socially distant activities. People, for the first time in ages, could imagine a world in which the city was built around people and not just around cars. Many cities around the world, such as Edmonton, responded by expanding patios, widening sidewalks, and creating more outdoor spaces for dining and recreation. And by most of accounts, these were big successes during the pandemic.
The pandemic was just such a brutal time for businesses to survive that now a lot of them are willing to try anything. So when we come to them and say, hey, we're shutting down this street, we're doing the street festival, they're like, awesome, there will be people here?
Yeah.
Great. Doing basically constant road closures since the beginning of 2021. It's like constantly extended patios on 104th Street. The farmers market is coming back this summer. Every Saturday, the road will be closed to cars and we'll have the farmers market back. We're doing another block party on Rice Howard Way where we're shutting down the street. Like that kind of thing is critical to just taking back public space for, you know, positive activity and getting people here and not just having empty streets, right? Like, we need people here, not just cars.
All of these changes highlighted how essential walkable environments were for our well-being. We witnessed how wider sidewalks allowed for safer pedestrian movement. We saw the low hum of anxiety that melted away when traffic wasn't around. I could be the only person that felt a little bit of an emotional boost when I got a smile on a wave from a stranger. I mean, we were social isolated for so long that just any social contact just felt so good. The pandemic showed us that creating walkable, people-friendly spaces isn't just a luxury, it is a necessity. I think I've clearly established that it's not walking itself, but the environment that we walk in that determines how enjoyable a walk is. There is no better proof that we enjoy walking than vacation. Often people take their free time and hard-earned money to travel to places like Europe, or even the more walkable parts of major North American cities such as New York or the Strip in Las Vegas. We often associate the idea of tourism and vacationing with walkability unknowingly. These touristy places tend to be walkable by nature for several reasons. Tourism destinations tend to be in areas developed before the rise of car culture, often retaining their historical pedestrian-friendly neighborhood layouts. This is especially true for older cities with narrow streets and a dense concentration of attractions, such as Rome, New York, or London. Tourist hotspots are often walkable so visitors can reach all the desired amenities conveniently, increasing the amount they spend, which of course is good for local business. Also, a big reason why tourists travel to these areas is for the experience of interacting with locals and walking in the environment. It wouldn't make sense just to travel to a beautiful location and take in all that beauty from the seat of a taxi. You'd want to go out on foot and explore. So if we know what we like about places that we travel to is that they're walkable, why don't we have any places similar to that close to home? Of course, your city may not have the visual appeal of a Paris, but it really feels like we don't even try to make the very own places where we live even bearable at all. We do technically have a walkable place, and I bet you didn't see this one coming. It's the mall. Malls have been going through it over the last several decades. From online shopping to the pandemic, many have been predicting the death of malls for such a long time. The number of malls in the US has declined by 16.7% from 2017 to 2022. However, a more apt assessment would be that malls are also reinventing themselves. Large luxury malls are actually doing quite well. The mall that Edmonton is known for on the west side is actually being seen as a blueprint for success. Malls will always stick around in some shape or form. the convenience of the mall is the appeal. The fact that you can buy clothes, get groceries, get a haircut, go to church, watch a movie, ride a roller coaster, swim in a wave pool, and have a pink date with a penguin all in one place is part of the appeal. Especially if you live in Canada or the US, having everything within walking distance of one location is a novelty. Malls provide a stark contrast to the everyday reality that most people in cities in this side of the globe deal with. Malls are walkable, which makes sense because malls were inspired by the walkable streets of Vienna? What? This is Victor Gurin. An architect who immigrated from Austria, who was not a fan of the car-dependent suburbs once he arrived in North America. He said, and I quote, "Avenues of horror flanked by the greatest collection of vulgarity, billboards, motels, gas stations, shanties, car lots, miscellaneous industrial repair equipment, hot dog stands, wayside stores ever collected by mankind." So yeah, he wasn't a fan. So it wasn't a surprise at all when he was given an opportunity to build a shopping center, he made sure that it was nothing like the suburbs. Rather than having each store in its own building, he put them all under one roof. Also, he ensured it was a nice place to walk in, so it included fountains, an aviary, and art installations. He even made sure that the parking lots were built far away from the buildings with long walkways, a walkable community where people could live, work, and play. But you do know what malls look like, right? So that you know that dream of a walkable utopia inside really turned more into a nightmare. 2 years before his death, he said, "I am called the father of the shopping mall. I would like to take this opportunity to disclaim paternity once and for all. I refuse to pay alimony to those bastard developments that destroyed our cities." Yeah, he really did like malls. Mall is one of the biggest embodiments of consumerism there is. What he designed, almost in spite of urban sprawl, became one of the biggest beneficiaries of that sprawl. Malls give the facade of a walkable, livable neighborhood, but a mall, usually in North America, is a private business surrounded by parking. Malls mimic walkable streets because it's good for the bottom line. It's in their financial interest to make their buildings as comfortable to walk in as possible, because the more you walk, the more you'll be willing to spend. If they cannot make money for you immediately, you're getting kicked out, which is why they enforce no loitering rules. This artificial walkability is in part the reason why malls are so ingrained into the zeitgeist within Canada and the US. Of course, other countries had malls. I had been to other malls before I moved to Canada, but the scale was obviously so much bigger than anticipated, and so was the cultural impact. Malls felt like a breath of fresh air compared to the car-centric cities surrounding them. They were often places for community. Me and my friends would usually go down to the mall and do kind of nothing. Sometimes we'd have church activities there, or we'd just hang out. Many times we didn't even want to shop. We just wanted to be in a place that just wasn't our house. So a mall just kind of felt like a refuge from the parking lots and the city around it. But cities can do the same things that malls did. They can learn from their walkable cities counterparts and use walkability to improve the well-being of their citizens. It is clear that we love to walk for recreation, but we just don't use it for transportation for some reason. What was it that malls took from city streets that the US and Canada can learn from? Like, what made them walkable? So, what makes a place walkable? Well, fortunately, there is research on this. We're going to use the walkability framework to help us understand what makes a place walkable. This framework reflects the structure of the LEED ND, which is a certification from the Canadian Green Building Council. I mention this to emphasize that this framework is legit. It is the real deal. There are 9 different design elements that make a neighborhood walkable, and I've categorized them into 2 main factors just for simplicity's sake. Is the street useful, and is it nice to walk down? Usefulness. A street that doesn't take you where you need to go is pretty much useless. These components can usually be identified on the map. The 3 design components that influence this are connectivity, density, and land use. Connectivity. How well a street network provides multiple and direct short routes to reach different destinations. This is best achieved through short distances between intersections and a grid network. Density. In this case, we're talking about residential density, and this is important because we're social creatures. So having areas where there's other people walking around just makes us feel a lot more comfortable. Obviously, if there's lots of people in an area walking, there's more of an incentive for institutions, governments, or businesses to make that area a bit more walkable because the demand is clearly there. So that one kind of makes sense. Land use. This one is obvious. Don't even need to explain it. It's just how you use the land. So this is just the different uses possible for the land, whether that be small businesses, is there shops, offices, is there pretty much a bunch of destinations in that area that are worth walking to. Aesthetic appeal. These are the kind of elements that can only really be appreciated if you're actually there. Kind of like that one party that you get invited to. Sorry to bring that up. Traffic safety. This one is particularly focused on the infrastructure needed to make it safe to walk, which pretty much always means slowing cars down, whether that be with planters or bollards or with narrower streets, just to reduce car speeds to make it feel more comfortable for people to cross the street and also to walk adjacent to the street as well. Parking. The more parking there is, the less walkable an area tends to be. This is because lots of parking lots are just unpleasant to walk through and they're unsafe. If there's no parking available, people may choose a different transportation mode to get to their destinations, such as walking or taking the bus or riding a bike. Parking can still be present in those neighborhoods, but it should be away from where the walkable areas, such as behind buildings or underground. Experience. This one is all about the visuals and the aesthetics. Is there nice things to look at? Is it clean? Is the street built for people? Or are the signs oriented to the sidewalk rather than being 15 feet in the air? This is very common in suburban areas, that they have large street signs that are very tall up off the ground and that can be seen for kilometers away. It's clearly not meant for people walking on the sidewalk because nobody's gonna walk by like this to look at the sign. You want signs which are perpendicular to the street on a human scale, as well as having buildings which are also human scale as well. Walking by large skyscrapers is just kind of uncomfortable, as well as walking in a big empty sprawl place. It doesn't feel like it's lived in. Having places that are, you can pretty much make eye contact with almost anybody on the street gives you a feeling of that I'm meant to be here. I'm supposed to walk here. Anything to the contrary just doesn't make it a good, comfortable walking experience. Green space. This one is measured by the availability dominated by vegetation, the size, proximity, and ease of access to green spaces. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. We like to walk in areas which have greenery around them. And I think you could be surprised by how much greenery you could fit into a city if it's planned well. I'll try to put some pictures here, but there's lots of good ways of making green and inaccessible places right in the heart of the city. Surveillance. This one is in reference to eyes on the street, which is an idea popularized by Jane Jacobs. This concept refers to how well people can be seen from inside a building and by other pedestrians. I know that sounds a little bit creepy, but let me finish the point. This visibility helps deter crime and foster a sense of community because you actually can see people's faces. And of course, if you're walking in a neighborhood quite often, you'll hopefully see familiar faces from day to day. In addition to that, people don't really like doing crime in front of other people. So just having visibility that generally helps with an area feeling more safe. And I think this is one of the points that really stick out to me because there's different ways of enforcing safety. I don't really like using the word enforce, but there's different ways of making sure an area is safe. And I think especially in this side of the world, when we think of safety, we just think of police. We don't think of any other way that we can introduce safety into an area. All the design elements of a street can use to promote crime or they can use to detract away from crime. And so by building the street in a way that promotes a safe environment, it reduces the need for more harsher forms of surveillance that is uncomfortable for a lot of people. You just kind of have more of a community feel in which that everybody can kind of see each other, so not many people are going to do something crazy or inappropriate because they know they're going to be watched by other people. Community. This is the presence of space that facilitates social interaction and encourage community affairs. This is like churches, plazas, community centers, communities that human element to a place that can make anywhere walkable. If you're walking with good people that you could care about, or in a neighborhood that you're comfortable in, even if the other areas are a bit lacking, that feeling of community can really go a long way. Neighborhoods that combine elements from these categories are thought to be more walkable. This framework helps us understand the components that contribute to walkability and how cities implement these elements and create walkable and more livable spaces. We've come a long way. Now that we both know what makes a city walkable, how do we go from this to this? How do we get more of the walkable streets that we desire? Edmonton, as usual, was ahead of the pack when it comes to implementing features that makes their city more walkable.
And then something else that I thought was quite fascinating was scramble crossings. A very contentious intervention in any city, right? Because it means that cars have to stop at all directions, and it then allows pedestrians to cross the street and the intersection diagonally as well as perpendicularly. And what the scramble crossings and how they were introduced and why they're so important is because the city introduced them as pilot projects. So they said, hey, we're just going to test this out in 5 key locations, and we are going to measure this. We're going to try to understand the impact. And if it's successful, it stays. And if it's not successful, we'll move in a different direction. So there's sort of a scrappiness in sort of this concept of pilot projects, because when you introduce something, people also tend to forget, right? Once people start to embrace it or sort of understand how it works, it just becomes a normal thing. And so the 5 scramble crossings were introduced in different locations, one by the Ice District, one on White Avenue, one right on Jasper and 104th Street, and a few other locations. And guess what? You know, sky didn't fall.
And of course, you should know Edmonton by now. Their bold moves didn't just stop there. Edmonton's entire plan for growth is based off of data-driven principles and sound urban planning. And that plan is called the City Plan. This plan is going to bring walkability to as many neighborhoods in Edmonton as possible. And it was developed based on technical studies, policy development, and over 2 years of public engagement with Edmontonians and various stakeholders.
Things like the city plan, there was extensive engagement that went into that, where our engagement teams would actually go out to communities and speak with Edmontonians who might not typically be showing up to City Hall or engaging in these conversations and saying, hey, what do you envision for your future city? How can we help you build a healthy life, an affordable life, a good life in our neighborhoods? And all of that is what helps inform the direction that we're going.
This plan is one of the first in North America to integrate land use and transportation plans, which have traditionally been separate. By combining these plans, Edmonton can strategically place higher density developments near transit hubs, creating mixed-use developments that encourage walking. Does this sound familiar? Of course it does. That's what this whole show's pretty much been about and been building towards. But the whole goal of the city plan is to encourage more walkable neighborhoods, giving people more choice in the neighborhoods. I don't want to go over this all over again because we spent almost an entire season talking about this stuff, but that's what the whole goal of the city plan is. Sometimes I feel like there's pessimism around North American cities, and sometimes I think like there's pessimism in Edmonton about the city itself. And I'm not saying Edmonton is perfect or that every single thing outlined in this plan goes perfectly to how they imagine it would go, but they are taking bold moves to actually make a difference. Like, I don't know, this is exciting. Like, I don't know how else to like put it. Like, I think a lot of the times it's so easy to be cynical. Edmonton isn't particularly unique. Edmonton is not particularly special. Edmonton is just a bog standard North American city when it comes to most metrics. But they're punching well above their weight when it comes to urban planning initiatives and making the moves that make the most sense for our future while making sure our current needs are met. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to gloat there, I had to go on there a little bit. But yeah, that's the whole point of the city plan. And of course, this plan should be super easy to get right in the door, right? This plan had no problems, there's no pushback at all. Of course not. There's been vocal pushback from across the board. Although they've had extensive public engagements over the last 2 years, for some it just doesn't seem to be enough. Many concerns are common amongst those who oppose densification, which I addressed in the last episode. However, I do want to address the very slim minority who have bought into this conspiracy theory regarding 15-minute cities. I tried to avoid mentioning this, but everything we've discussed so far has essentially described and been building towards the idea of a 15-minute city. The idea that everything you need is just 15 minutes away via bike or walking. The reason why I've been hesitant to say the word 15-minute cities is because this concept has become the center of a conspiracy theory. Now, if you've watched almost a whole season of this show, I doubt that you fall into this camp. But it's important that we stay aware of what everybody's thinking when it comes to how their cities are changing. The conspiracy theory suggests that 15-minute cities are a sinister plot by the government to restrict our freedom of movement and control our lives. Proponents claim it's a step towards a dystopian society where we're confined to small zones and are constantly monitored. But let's take a step back and look at the facts. This theory gained traction during the COVID-19 pandemic and was further fueled by the City of Oxford's plan to implement 15-minute cities within their neighborhoods. Now, I don't have time to get into the specifics of that particular plan, but the general idea was to limit car traffic within residential neighborhoods by applying similar schemes to congestion charges, which are common in Europe. Critics claim that this plan would restrict people's freedoms and was an overreach that would lead to a totalitarian surveillance state. While this sounds far-fetched, I do have a little bit of sympathy and understanding for their perspective. Well, I'm not sure if you know this, but I'm Black. I'm aware that urban planning has a history of being discriminatory towards marginalized communities, and that they can have negative effects which can be seen as surveilling and mistreating different groups of people. An example of this practice would be redlining, the practice of restricting black people, which was effectively segregated neighborhoods and limited economic opportunities. Redlining wasn't just an isolated policy, but it was part of a broader system of urban planning and housing discrimination that perpetuated segregation. Such policies led to disinvestment in predominantly black neighborhoods. So I understand being critical or skeptical of any initiative that's looking to change your neighborhood, especially if it's a departure from the norm. Now, when it comes to 15-minute cities, there is no basis for this conspiracy theory at all. Unlike redlining, there's no specific policy that will lead to discrimination or totalitarian control. People are not being tracked and are free to move as they wish. This entire theory is based off what people perceive the intentions of urban planners and elected officials to be. At that point, it becomes impossible to prove or disprove. So until there's a specific policy being proposed, I'm not really trying to hear it. This whole thing is a non-starter. It's important to weigh all options and perspectives when it comes to our cities, but it's also just as crucial to consider the credentials and the sources of those that you listen to. That's why I take so much time providing sources for my research for these videos, because you should know where I'm getting my information from. And if there's something wrong with one of my sources, please let me know. And I'll take that on and I'll do better next time. I'm not going to be perfect. I don't want anyone to think that I have all the information or I'm perfect. Everything I know is just from the research that I've done and from my education. But this is an ever-evolving field. And so there's always going to be different perspectives and new things to learn. And I'm open to that. It's just that oftentimes when scrutiny is being placed on institutions, that same scrutiny is not placed on other people who are providing contrary information. I was just wrapping up the edit for this episode, and I wasn't happy with how I left things. Like, I feel like I didn't have enough context understanding why people were getting so caught up in this conspiratorial aspect of 15-minute cities, something that seemed so innocuous when I was studying this stuff in school. And I was actually editing the interview I did with Ashley, the city councilor, and she mentioned something that was actually pretty insightful that kind of answered this question that I had.
Unfortunately, and I think we need to get better at this, far too often I think Edmontonians feel like these changes are happening to them when they're actually part of that change.
Helping people realize that they are part of this change, that their voices is needed at the table, will probably help them feel a lot more heard and listened to, and that we can address their concerns. So they don't have to turn to conspiracies for answers. They can turn to the communities for those answers. I think that it's so easy to villainize people that have different opinions than us. But this is part of city building. These hard conversations, just challenging each other. This is part of the process. These problems are part of the process of building a city. And on that note, I think Tracy's mom has some great advice for us.
I think some of the best advice I was ever given was by my mom. But she always told me, she goes, Tracy, if you ever have a problem, go for a walk. And she's right. And you know what? You will ruminate on that problem, but I'm going to guarantee you by the end of it, you'll have come up with a solution, or your blood pressure is going to be a little bit lower. So it's like, that's the beauty of physical exercise, right? Is that it's an untapped healer.